Good morning, everyone. I am back again. I welcome you on board in our today's lesson. I want us to discuss some very important things in as far as nutrition in animals is concerned. In our previous discussion, we had looked at nutrition in plants, and I had told you that plants make their own food, and in that regard, they are referred to as autotrophs or autotrophs, and that mode of feeding is referred to as autotrophic mode of feeding. In our today's lesson, as we embark on looking at nutrition in animals, you should first understand that animals don't make their own food. They depend on what has already been manufactured. So animals qualify to be referred to as heterotrophs, and the type of feeding or the mode of feeding, to be precise, is referred to as heterotrophic mode of feeding. So they are heterotrophs. That means they don't manufacture their own food but depend on what has already been manufactured. To tailor down, a student is supposed to actually get introduced to the following types of feeding. Number one, we have what we call holozoic type of feeding. That means that an organism can be able to obtain food substances, digest the food substances. In that process, will be able to convert the insoluble food substances into soluble food substances, which are readily absorbed into the bloodstream, and they are now maximally used by the cells. And that is actually what we refer to as assimilation. What is assimilation? Assimilation is where the soluble products which have been able to get absorbed into the bloodstream are delivered to the different cells in the body for use maximally. Now, apart from holozoic type of feeding, there is another type of feeding referred to as saprophytism or saprophytism. Saprophytism or saprophytism is a mode of feeding where the bacteria under kingdom Monera and the mushroom, toadstool, yeast, bracken fern and others under kingdom fungi will be able to obtain nutrients from dead decaying matter, hence in that process causing decomposition. So the bacteria under kingdom Monera and several organisms like mushroom and toadstool and mold under kingdom fungi will be able to obtain nutrients from dead decaying matter, such that they end up facilitating a very important process called decomposition in a science related subject. And in that process, if it is actually on the ground, the nutrients get released to the soil, and the plants are the ones to benefit in as far as productivity is concerned. The third type of feeding is where we have an organism being able to obtain nutrients from another organism, to obtain shelter from another organism, and getting protected from other organisms when it does not offer anything in return. That is what we call parasitism, where one organism obtains nutrients, may obtain shelter, and may get protected by another organism, and in return, the organism getting all these things does not benefit this other organism in any way. What is the meaning of this? This means that the organism obtaining the nutrients is called a parasite. The other organism gets a chance of only providing nutrients to this other organism called the parasite, but it does not benefit in any way from this parasite. That is parasitism. An example that you can give is a cow being the one providing nutrients, shelter, and protection, and a tick being the one that is getting these things and qualifying to be called a parasite. The last type of feeding is what you call symbiosis, or others may pronounce it as symbiosis. That means that two organisms are living together and mutually benefiting from each other. Let's give this example. For example, when you look at the nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil, and when you look at the leguminous plants, you will realize that the nitrogen fixing bacteria found inside the soil is actually found around the root nodules of leguminous plants. These nitrogen fixing bacteria will benefit these plants, the leguminous plants, by fixing the nitrogen in the plants, so that at the end of the day, the plants can be able to manufacture food which is rich in proteins. In return, the plant provides shelter to the bacteria. The plant provides protection to the bacteria. The plant provides nutrients to the bacteria. The organisms are mutually benefiting from each other, and none of them is acting like a parasite. The bacteria fixes the nitrogen into the plant, the leguminous plant. The leguminous plant in return provides nutrients, shelter, and protection to the bacteria. So they are mutually benefiting from each other. Now, to tailor down our discussion, we shall basically go to the process of digestion. Everybody understands that digestion begins in the mouth, and you are always told that as an individual, as a human being, please ensure that you have a balanced diet so that all the nutrients needed by the body are readily available for the purposes of growth and development, and you being able to have what you call a healthy body for a longer duration in as far as your stay on earth is concerned. So we need to have carbohydrates, we need to have proteins, we need to have fats, we need to have enough water, we need to have enough vitamins, we need to have enough mineral salts, and that encompasses a balanced diet. And on top of that, we also need to have what you call roughage, or the fiber, which actually gets referred to as the cellulose in plants. That is very, very important. In one, reducing constipation, and we shall discuss that at a later stage. A student is supposed to introduce himself or herself to the process of digestion by first saying that the first thing to take place is that the food is introduced into the mouth, and the process by which the food is introduced into the mouth is called ingestion. Inside. So the food gets introduced into the mouth, ingestion. Once the food has been introduced into the mouth, there are different features that we shall discuss in as far as digestion in the mouth is concerned. Number one, you are supposed to understand that we have three different types of glands. We have parotid gland, we have submandibular gland, we have sublingual gland. Those glands are very important in secreting saliva. Once the food gets introduced into the mouth, the brain sends impulses. The brain sends nerve impulses to the different organs found around the mouth, such that those organs will end up getting stimulated to produce the saliva. What you're supposed to understand is, when you have the saliva being introduced into the mouth, you are first supposed to ask yourself, what are the contents that make up saliva? Saliva is made up of mucus. Saliva is made up of water. Saliva is made up of a particular enzyme called salivary amylase or ptyalin. P-T-Y-A-L-I-N, P-T-Y-A-L-I-N, ptyalin or salivary amylase. When the food gets introduced into the mouth, the food is mechanically broken down, physically broken down by the teeth. Through the chewing process, the food gets broken down into tiny particles. And the main aim of breaking down the food into tiny particles is to ensure that it offers a person who is actually taking the food an easier time in terms of swallowing. Have you ever once ingested food? You don't chew the food and swallow. You'll choke yourself. So take care. Take time to chew the food so that one, you want to reduce the food into tiny particles which can actually be able to get swallowed easily to avoid any form of choking. Number two, adequate chewing offers a large surface area so that the food can be well acted on by the enzyme called salivary amylase or ptyalin. Two benefits of well digested food: easy swallowing and offering a large surface area for the enzyme called ptyalin to act on the food. Number two, the tongue is there to roll the food, and as the tongue rolls the food, it also pushes the food at the back of the mouth. So the tongue rolls the food and pushes the food at the back of the mouth. When swallowing will just begin taking place. Something also to take note of is when swallowing has just begun, when swallowing is beginning, a person is first supposed to understand that the saliva mixes with the food in the process of chewing very well in a way that one, the mucus in the saliva lubricates the food to reduce friction so that there is easy swallowing. Number two, the water, which is acting as a solvent, softens the food for easy swallowing and for easy digestion. Number three, the salivary amylase or ptyalin breaks down starch in the food to maltose. The salivary amylase or ptyalin breaks down the starch in the food to maltose. Up to that point, the tongue will automatically push the food at the back of the mouth so that swallowing starts. Ensure that you have well chewed the food to ensure that whatever I've mentioned is well taken care of before swallowing starts. As swallowing starts along the esophagus, you are supposed to understand that along the esophagus we have longitudinal and circular muscles. The muscles contract and relax. As they are contracting and relaxing, it is offering a very smooth avenue in as far as swallowing is concerned. But remember, before even swallowing begins, the tongue has already rolled the food which has been chewed into small round balls called boluses. Singular, bolus. The tongue has already rolled the food into small round balls called boluses or singular bolus. So that along the esophagus, as the circular and longitudinal muscles contract and relax, the small round balls called boluses are pushed down the esophagus. As the small round boluses are pushed down the esophagus, we have along the esophagus also the epithelial layer, which ensures that the inner tissues of the esophagus are protected from any form of damage in as far as that part is concerned, in relation to what? How delicate the tissues in our body are concerned. So what am I saying here? This ensures that the food is swallowed smoothly, but the tissues along the esophagus are not damaged because of that epithelial layer and the way the food has been lubricated, so that when the food is well lubricated, it actually reduces friction, so that there's what you call the smooth movement of the food along the esophagus. The opening of the mouth is called cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is dilated to open so that it allows food into the stomach. When the food gets introduced into the stomach, the wall of the stomach is stimulated such that the gastric gland embedded in the glandular layer of the stomach is stimulated to produce gastric juice. The gastric juice contains the following enzymes. Number one, it contains pepsinogen. It contains renin with double N, not single N. There's a difference here. Renin with double N is the one that is actually forming part of the components of the gastric juice in the stomach. Renin with a single N, R-E-N-I-N, is a very important enzyme to facilitate what we call vasodilation of the blood vessels when the body is trying to regulate its body temperature. So, pepsinogen, renin, hydrochloric acid is also forming part of the components of gastric juice. And lastly, we have mucus. Gastric juice is actually a very important juice produced by the gastric gland embedded in the glandular layer of the stomach, and due to the following components it has, these are the functions it performs to facilitate digestion in the stomach. The hydrochloric acid, the first component of gastric juice, kills the germs found in the food. What do I mean? A person can pick food from the ground and eat. The food may actually be contaminated with bacteria. The bacteria are killed while the food is in the stomach by hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid provides an acidic environment so that it favors the working of the enzymes pepsinogen and renin, because in the stomach the pH is actually acidic and it needs to be acidic so that pepsinogen and renin are favored in terms of their work as far as digestion is concerned. Because we had looked at this and said that in as far as enzymes are concerned, enzymes are protein in nature. Enzymes are affected by pH such that there are those who will work well under acidic conditions and others will work well under basic conditions. So in the stomach, the environment is acidic to favor the working in a better way of pepsinogen and renin. Pepsinogen is activated to pepsin. Remember, as you try to look at the wall of the stomach, these enzymes must be in their inactive form. That's why God is a miraculous God. Why? Because He actually made it clear and made it happen that these enzymes in our lining, in as far as our stomach is concerned, must be in their inactive form. If they were left to be in their active form, they would have digested the wall of the stomach. So we do not have pepsin in the wall of the stomach. We have pepsinogen, which is an inactive form, a precursor form of pepsin. Pepsinogen is now activated to pepsin when food is introduced into the stomach, such that the pepsin breaks down proteins to peptides. That means that digestion of starch starts in the mouth. Digestion of proteins starts in the stomach. A student is supposed to understand that. Something to take note of also is that the proteins have been broken down to peptides or peptones. The renin, on the other hand, will ensure that the protein found in milk, called caseinogen, is broken down to casein. the protein called caseinogen in milk is broken down to casein or card, C-U-R-D. That is why there are cases where a student can be asked to explain or to be able to give a reason as to why breastfeeding mothers have a large amount of renin. Why? Renin will ensure that the milk is first converted to what? To casein. Because when the milk gets into the body of these young children, it gets absorbed readily. Why? Because their digestive system is not well developed to be able to take care of the conversion of caseinogen to casein. So what have I said here? Pepsin converts proteins to peptides or peptones. Renin converts caseinogen, a type of protein in milk, to casein. The mucus will, in a larger way, further lubricate the food. What am I saying? Further lubricate the food. Or what do I mean? I am trying to mean that the food has already been lubricated by the mucus, which was forming part of the components of saliva. When the food reaches in the stomach, the production of more mucus will further lubricate the food. The food becomes slippery for easy movement to small intestine. When the food is in the stomach, the circular and longitudinal muscles along the wall of the stomach will contract and relax, and in that process they will be mixing the contents of the stomach so that the end product is a watery semi-solid substance called chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. The chyme leaves the stomach, now heading to the small intestine. The mucus also still in the stomach will be able to actually create a barrier between the contents of the stomach and the wall of the stomach, such that when the mucus is actually lubricated along the stomach, in as far as its wall is concerned, the hydrochloric acid does not corrode the wall of the stomach. The activated enzymes like pepsin do not digest the wall of the stomach. So mucus is very, very important to lubricate the food, so that this will facilitate a reduction in friction for easier movement of the digested food as it moves to the small intestine. Then number two, to create a barrier so that the wall of the stomach is protected from corrosion by the acid and digestion by the enzymes. The food leaves the stomach through an exit called pyloric sphincter. As the food leaves the stomach through what we call pyloric sphincter, it gets now its way to the small intestine. And remember, the small intestine has two parts. We have the duodenum, the upper part of the small intestine, and we have the ileum, the lower part of the small intestine. To be very specific, you are supposed to understand that the duodenum, the upper part of the small intestine, receives two secretions. And you are supposed to understand that we have two very important hormones here called cholecystokinin and secretin. Cholecystokinin and secretin are the two hormones which stimulate the duodenal wall such that digestion will go on as planned by the grace of the living God. There are two secretions. One secretion comes from the pancreas, another secretion comes from the liver. In the liver, we normally have what we call bile juice. Bile juice is not only bile juice. Bile juice has salts, and those salts are called sodium taurocholate and sodium glycocholate. Apart from the two salts, bile juice also has what we call bilirubin. Where is bilirubin coming from? You need to understand that red blood cells in our bodies have a maximum lifespan of 3 to 4 months. After the 4 months, the red blood cells, which are very old, are taken to the liver where they are broken down. And in the process of breaking down the red blood cells, a very, very, very toxic substance that has no help in our body called bilirubin is also produced. So as bile juice trickles down from the liver, it is actually having bile salts and bilirubin. The sodium taurocholate and the sodium glycocholate, the two bile salts, are very, very important to facilitate a process called emulsification. And emulsification means the breakdown of large fat droplets into tiny fatty droplets. That's the beginning of digestion of fats. You have eaten a coconut. You have eaten food where cooking oils have been used. You have the fats in your body. The first and the beginning point of digestion of the fats you have digested is where we have the bile salts, sodium taurocholate and sodium glycocholate, breaking down the large fatty droplets into tiny fatty droplets. That is it. But when the liver produces bile juice, the bile juice does not just trickle down immediately. The bile juice is partially, temporarily stored in the gallbladder. So when the food is moving down the small intestine, the two organs, the pancreas and the liver, are stimulated by these hormones, cholecystokinin and secretin, such that bile juice is produced and pancreatic juice is produced. Bile juice has the two salts, sodium taurocholate and sodium glycocholate, to break down large fat droplets into tiny fatty droplets. The bilirubin is useless as it also moves and accompanies the bile juice. It actually ends up being removed in a way that it actually gets eliminated from the body. It is the one that gives the feces you are always dropping in your toilet its brown color or its characteristic color. So the bilirubin gives the urine and the feces its characteristic color. You are wondering, why is my feces brown? Why is my feces yellow? That is the beginning point of you understanding or having a better understanding of this area. So the pancreatic juice released from the pancreatic cells inside that organ contains the following substances. Number one, it contains pancreatic lipase as the first enzyme. It contains trypsinogen. It contains pancreatic amylase. And it contains sodium hydrogen carbonate. A student is supposed to understand that when the food is leaving the stomach, the food is acidic because of the hydrochloric acid. And remember, in the small intestine, the duodenum and the ileum, the environment must be alkaline, such that those enzymes in those two regions of the small intestine are able to work effectively. So what do? God is so marvelous. He said that the bile produced is first going to neutralize the acidic chyme or the semi-solid food from the stomach, so that the food reaching in the upper part of the small intestine or the duodenum is not again acidic, it is alkaline. When you look at the components of pancreatic juice, we have sodium hydrogen carbonate, which is a base. That base also helps the bile juice in neutralizing the acidic food from the stomach, so that the food reaching in the duodenum and even ending up going to the lower part of the small intestine is not again acidic, but it is basic. So, my student, you are supposed to know that the pancreatic lipase, which is a component of pancreatic juice, will break down the remaining fats or lipids into tiny fatty droplets. That means that the pancreatic lipase, a component of pancreatic juice, will break down the remaining fats or lipids into tiny fatty droplets. And that means that the tiny fatty droplets are having two very important areas. Now, what forms a lipid? You have discussed this. You will actually realize that 3 fatty acids and a glycerol will form what you call a triglyceride, which is a lipid. You are wondering, fats, lipids, oils. A lipid can either be a fat or an oil. A lipid is actually a fat or an oil. A fat is a lipid which is a solid at room temperature. An oil is a lipid which is a liquid at room temperature. So fats and oils are lipids. So when pancreatic lipase breaks down the lipids, they will be broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. And I've told you, 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol will form what you call a triglyceride, which is now a lipid. So 3 fatty acids and glycerol will actually be able to give us the end products of digestion of fats. Students, pancreatic amylase breaks down the remaining starch which was not broken down in the mouth to maltose. Pancreatic amylase, a component of pancreatic juice, will break down the remaining starch which was not broken down in the mouth by salivary amylase to maltose. Just see how God is so wonderful. Just see how God is so unique. Just see how God is so marvelous. Nothing has ever gone wrong in as far as our bodies are concerned. Through His grace, He is so wonderful and so marvelous. I've told you that the sodium hydrogen carbonate, a component of pancreatic juice, will neutralize the remaining acidic food from the stomach, which has not been neutralized by the bile juice, so that the food becomes alkaline and not acidic. So that the enzymes now in the duodenum and in the ileum, as regions of the small intestine, will be able to work well because of that alkaline environment. Students, you are supposed to understand that when you try to look at how digestion is taking place, we are dealing with each and every component to ensure that all the insoluble food products are converted to soluble products which are going to be absorbed in the ileum. Now, as we progress forward, trypsinogen is in its inactive form. Trypsinogen will be activated to trypsin. Trypsinogen will be activated to trypsin by a very, very important compound called enterokinase. Enterokinase activates trypsinogen to trypsin, so that the trypsin breaks down the remaining proteins to peptides or peptones. So a peptide or a peptone. So proteins are immediately broken down to peptides or peptones. And that's not the end product of digestion of proteins. You should understand that. As we progress forward, you should be able also to understand that the food has now undergone further breakdown. The food can now go to the lower part of the small intestine called the ileum. In the ileum, we have a juice called intestinal juice. Remember, once the food reaches at a particular point along the alimentary canal or the gut, the walls are stimulated. The gland within that wall is actually also stimulated to produce the juice immediately and automatically in a voluntary manner without any pressure. So the gland in the small intestine, now the ileum to be very specific, the lower part of the small intestine, will be stimulated to produce intestinal juice. The intestinal juice is also called succus entericus. S-U-C-C-U-S. Entericus. E-N-T-E-R-I-C-U-S. Succus entericus. The succus entericus or intestinal juice has the following enzymes: sucrase, maltase, lipase, peptidase. You have discussed types of carbohydrates. You said the first category, monosaccharides, like glucose, fructose, and galactose. You went to disaccharides. You talked of sucrose, maltose, and lactose. You went to polysaccharides, and you talked of cellulose, starch, pectin, chitin, glycogen, lignin. You have so many types of polysaccharides. A monosaccharide will only contain a specific number of glucose molecules. It may only have one glucose molecule, mono, one. So monosaccharides have one glucose molecule, disaccharides have two glucose molecules, and polysaccharides have many. Poly means many, so they have so many molecules of glucose. Like a starch molecule or a glycogen will contain so many molecules of glucose. You are wondering, what is starch and glycogen? Starch is a form in which the excess glucose is stored in plants. Glycogen is a form in which the excess glucose is stored in animal tissues. Students, you are supposed to take note of that one. Now, as you progress forward, you have actually been able to get introduced to the different types of enzymes that form part of what we call succus entericus or intestinal juice. A student is supposed to understand that succus entericus or intestinal juice having lipase will ensure that all lipids, all fats or oils are broken down to fatty acids and glycerol. Maltase will ensure that maltose is broken down to glucose. Sucrase will ensure that sucrose, a very important disaccharide found in sugarcane, is broken down to glucose and fructose. Now, lactase ensures that lactose is broken down to glucose and galactose. A student is supposed to understand also that peptidases will break down peptides or peptones to amino acids. So when you eat meat or eat an egg, what gets into the blood is amino acids. When you take maize, either roasted or just cooked, you are going to end up having glucose entering the blood system. When you eat food rich in fats or you eat oily foods, what is going to enter into your blood is not oil or fats. Whatever is going to diffuse into the bloodstream is called fatty acids and glycerol. Vitamins are not digested. Vitamins are readily absorbed into the bloodstream and they perform different functions. Water is not digested. Remember, when the body is dehydrated, as the blood is passing through the brain and the hypothalamus part of the brain senses that the body is dehydrated or the blood is dehydrated, information is sent directly to the different organs, and the first organ to get targeted is the stomach, such that during digestion some water is absorbed in the stomach into the bloodstream. As the water actually is absorbed into the bloodstream, it goes to the blood and dilutes the blood, so that when the blood was initially highly concentrated, it becomes diluted and it becomes less concentrated. As the water is absorbed, it becomes very beneficial in terms of the different functions, because we cannot have our cells becoming dehydrated. They will shrink or they will become crenated, and that one hampers their function. Students, you are supposed to know that we have come to the end of digestion, and in the ileum is where absorption takes place. How is the ileum adapted to its function of absorbing food effectively? Number one, the ileum is long enough to increase the surface area for absorption of food. The ileum is highly coiled. So when it's coiled, as the food is moving down the ileum, it is highly coiled. So as the food is moving down, this slows down the movement of food. So it's creating more time for absorption. The ileum has villi and microvilli, which are tiny projections that increase the surface area for absorption of food. We have enough mitochondria to some cases where they actually respire aerobically to produce enough energy for the purposes of active transport, where that process is required in as far as absorption of food is concerned. The ileum has a dense network of blood capillaries such that it creates what we call a concentration gradient, where the concentration in the small intestine is higher and the concentration in the blood is lower. It creates what we call a concentration gradient. So the food substances will easily diffuse into the bloodstream and be transported to different parts of the body. To add on this, the small intestine has what we call lacteals. Lacteals are there to ensure that fatty acids and glycerol are absorbed. When they are absorbed, they are drained into the lymphatic system, which again joins the blood circulatory system. When fatty acids find their way into the lactates, they join again to form fats. That is what actually gives the lactates their whitish appearance. But when the lymphatic system again finds its way in as far as connecting the blood circulatory system is concerned, the fats are again disoriented to form fatty acids and glycerol, and they are transported to different parts of the body. For example, they are transported to what we call the adipose tissue, or the subcutaneous layer of the skin, where the fats are deposited to ensure that your body is insulated against excess heat loss. Number 2, some fats are actually taken to very delicate organs like the heart and the kidney, so that when they cover the heart and the kidney, they act as shock absorbers, so that the delicate organs are not damaged or completely affected when someone gets an injury. This is all about the grace of God. We cannot complain, but we thank Him for the far He has actually taken us in as far as whatever we have in our bodies is concerned. Students, it is advisable that just eat 2 pieces of meat. There are those who eat 10. Why? The body does not have a mechanism of storing excess proteins. In fact, the excess amino acids resulting from the digestion of proteins are deaminated and removed from the body. The body does not have any storage mechanism for excess proteins. When you consume 10 pieces of meat, you are not doing anything. You are actually more or less the same as that person who has eaten 1 piece. The body requires a particular number of the quantity of proteins per day, but not 10 pieces. Because our body is not able to actually have any excess of the proteins in as far as our system is concerned. The glucose is actually very important to our body. You should understand that now first, before we can go to glucose, that when you look at the amino acids, the amino acids are taken to the different parts of the body where repair and bodybuilding is required, especially in areas where tissues have been worn out. Is where the amino acids can be taken. They again form the proteins and they form part of the tissues of the body in as far as bodybuilding and repair is concerned. The excess are deaminated. The excess are deaminated by the liver. Students, when I talk about deamination, what I'm trying to mean is that the amine group from the proteins combines with the excess carbon dioxide to form urea. The urea is taken to the liver. Now from the liver, the urea goes to the kidney and it's eliminated through urine. You are wondering how this is so unique. I'm saying the excess amino acids are taken to the liver. When they reach in the liver, the amine group in the amino acids combine with carbon dioxide to form urea. What is the chemical formula of carbon dioxide and urea combining? CO, open bracket, NH2, close bracket, 2. That is urea. Capital C, capital O, open bracket, capital N, capital H, subscript 2, close bracket, subscript 2. That is urea. The urea gets to the kidney where it will be eliminated together with excess water and excess salts when someone urinates. You should be able to understand this very, very, very well. Now, we have said that is what happens to proteins. When you go to glucose, some of the glucose is going to be taken to the respiring cells in the liver, where the glucose will be broken down to produce energy for the body. Remember, the easiest way in which a body can get energy is to break down glucose through respiration in the mitochondria found in the respiring cells in the liver. When glucose is absent is when the body can go for fats, and lastly, the body can now go to proteins when there's what we call starvation or fasting. It is very rare for the body to go for the proteins. That is where someone starts wasting in as far as losing body weight is concerned. A student is supposed to understand that when glucose has been taken to the liver to be broken down to produce energy through respiration, not all the glucose is going to be used. The excess glucose is going to be converted to glycogen by a very important hormone called insulin. Insulin, for those who have diabetes, you get injected with insulin so that the insulin converts your excess glucose to glycogen. Because when the level of glucose rises, you are going to be diabetic. So what am I saying? You should be able to watch your diet. Very, very important. Watch your diet. Avoid excess sugary foods. Avoid excess sugary foods. Students, it is actually clear to us scientifically and biologically that when the body realizes that the level of glucose in the blood has dropped, the brain is stimulated such that impulses are sent to the liver to ensure that the excess glucose, which was stored in form of glycogen, is going to be converted back now to glucose by the aid of a hormone called glucagon. So the glucagon converts the glycogen to glucose. Insulin converts glucose to glycogen. That is what you call homeostasis. Now, how do these food substances find their way into the liver? You are supposed to understand that from the small intestine, the food has diffused into the bloodstream. From the bloodstream, we have what we call hepatic portal vein. H-E-P-A-T-I-C P-O-R-T-A-L vein. Hepatic portal vein is the one that carries all the dissolved food substances in the blood to the liver for further actions in as far as assimilation is concerned, to maximally use the nutrients. Now, to have a better understanding of this, a student is supposed to understand that when digestion has ended and the soluble products have been absorbed into the bloodstream, we have some alcohol, we have some water, we have some mineral salts. All these and even some vitamins are going to be absorbed into the bloodstream in the large intestine or colon. Yes, as simple as that. Some water will be absorbed into the bloodstream in the stomach when the body is highly dehydrated, but some of the water remaining and some vitamins and some minerals like the calcium ions, the magnesium ions are going to be absorbed into the bloodstream in the large intestine. It is very, very unfortunate that not all the food that enters the mouth will be absorbed into the bloodstream. We have also the undigested and indigestible material. The undigested and indigestible material, which cannot be digested, will be removed as feces. Why am I saying like this? I want to introduce something very important called roughage, or the fibers, which are actually the cellulose in plant cells. They will actually add bulk to the feces or the undigested material or the indigestible material, such that constipation is reduced. Do you want to go to the toilet with a newspaper so that you struggle relieving yourself? Eat enough food rich in roughage or fiber and take in enough water to avoid struggling in ensuring that you relieve yourself in a very peaceful manner. I wonder, sometimes when you don't take enough food rich in roughage, where do we get the roughage? These green vegetables have roughage. These fruits have roughage. Some cereals have roughage. Why are you struggling going to look for the processed foods? Avoid processed foods and take more of the natural food. If you want to stay more, please, these are the ingredients of having a longer lifestyle. 1, do exercise frequently. Number 2, take in enough water. Number 3, avoid more processed foods and look for more natural foods. And the most important aspect is ensure that you have more of the fruits and vegetables and less of proteins, especially the red meat. Take more of the white meat and avoid to a larger extent the red meat. I know why I'm saying like that. The red meat has more fats. When fats get into the body and they actually find the temperature too low, what happens? They solidify in the blood vessels. When they solidify in the blood vessels get blocked. What happens? The heart is actually going to be overworked in as far as pumping blood is concerned. When the heart gets overworked, what happens? My friend, you will actually end up having what you call heart attack, where the blood vessels rupture, the heart is completely unable to function, and it just stops working. That's what we call heart failure. And that is how people collapse in their offices. As simple as that. Do exercise. Take in enough water. Have more of the fruits and vegetables. Reduce the processed foods. And ensure that you eat food rich in roughage. And always pray to God to give you a healthy lifestyle always and always and always and always. Thank you so much for listening to me. I have been your host, Mr. Oscar Ngatia. I'm always there for you. I'm privileged to have you on board in as far as learning is concerned. Feel free to contact me through 0710 194 311, 0713 122 669, or you can email me on oscar.ngata@gmail.com. Thank you so much. God bless you and have a nice afternoon. Be blessed so much. Be blessed so much. Thank you.